everyone. You know, when you think about a ruling class, you think of wealth, right? Or maybe like royal bloodlines.
Inheritances, titles, all that.
Exactly. But what if I told you there's a ruling class built on something totally different, something unexpected, a shared revolutionary legacy?
Now that's a new one.
That's China's Princelings. We're talking about the descendants, the children of the very same leaders who established the People's Republic of China.
Okay, so these are the children of, like, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, the big names.
The architects of communist China.
Yeah.
And to really get inside this world, we're going deep on a book by Jean-Luc Domenach called Les Filles de Prince.
Makes sense. Sons of princes.
Right.
Pretty on the nose.
It is, but Domenach, he's not just looking at names and family trees. He's like a historical detective.
Oh, how so?
He's piecing together biographies, looking at economic activity, really trying to understand the mechanisms, how this group operates.
So to understand the Princelings today, you have to go back to the beginning.
You got it. And trust me, their childhoods were anything but ordinary. Just take Mao Anying,
Mao Zedong's son.
the eldest. This guy was practically raised in Stalin's USSR.
Whoa, talk about a pressure cooker.
Right. Can you imagine the weight of those expectations? Your dad's leading a revolution and you're living in the heart of the Soviet Union.
It's like a whole other level of intensity.
Totally. And it's fascinating because Stalin, he sets up this school, right, specifically for the children of these high-ranking communists.
Like a training ground for the future leaders of the communist world.
Exactly. And get this, Mao Anying, he's elected president of the student body there.
He wasn't just coasting on his father's name then.
Not at all. Domenach even talks about how he was writing letters directly to Stalin, engaging with him on actual political matters. This wasn't just, oh, hey, how are you? This was deep stuff.
Wow, so he was already completely immersed in that world.
Oh, yeah. And then World War II breaks out.
What did he do? Surely he didn't sit that one out.
Are you kidding? Domenach writes about him serving as an officer in a tank unit, fighting the Nazis.
Talk about a crash course in leadership. Under fire, no less.
No kidding. But then his story, it takes this tragic turn during the Korean War.
That's right, he died in combat. Wasn't that part of why Mao Zedong was so reluctant to intervene in Korea at first?
Right, he didn't want to risk his son. But then it seems like he saw it as a chance for Mao and to prove himself, to really step into that leadership role.
A high-stakes test for sure, with the fate of China hanging in the balance.
Absolutely. And tragically, he's killed in action. Domenach actually argues that this loss, it had this profound impact on Mao Zedong, made him isolated, distrustful.
Wow. I can see how losing an heir, especially under those circumstances, could do that to a person.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Domenach argues that this tragedy, as awful as it was, it actually helps set the stage for the rise of the Princelings as a class.
How so?
Well, think about it. With Mao's heir apparent gone, the question of succession, wide open.
Ah, I see. So suddenly the children of all these other CCP leaders, they become much more important.
Exactly. They represented a potential threat, for sure, but also a potential solution.
It's like a power vacuum just waiting to be filled.
Exactly. But even in the early days of the People's Republic, life for these princelings, it wasn't all, fancy schools and banquets.
I'd imagine not.
Domenach, he uncovers these stories about how some of them faced real hardships, like separated from their parents, sent to live with others, lacking even basic necessities.
Really. I guess even within a system that's supposed to be all about equality, there are still levels.
Right. But after the CCP's victory in 1949, things shift dramatically for these kids.
We finally get to enjoy the fruits of their parents' labor, so to speak.
It's like they went from surviving to thriving almost overnight. Better schools, improved living conditions, the sense that they were,
Destined for great things.
Exactly. And the CCP itself, they played a huge role in this transformation.
So they were being groomed for power, even if they didn't realize it at the time.
That's the question, isn't it? They were often sent to the same prestigious schools, fostering this sense of shared identity, shared destiny.
Building relationships that would last a lifetime.
And that makes you wonder, right, how much of their success later on was about merit and how much was about just being part of this?
Exclusive club.
Exactly.
So last time we were talking about how the CCP really nurtured this sense of elitism among the Princelings, right? Especially through those top-tier schools.
It was like their own little incubator for future leaders. But even for this privileged group, things were about to get a lot more, complicated, to say the least.
That's an understatement. We're talking about the Great Leap Forward and what followed, which is often called the liberalization and backlash period.
Right, a time of massive upheaval for China.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar with this period, the Great Leap Forward was basically Mao Zedong's big push to, like, rapidly transform China from this agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse.
And it backfired, didn't it?
Big time. Led to widespread famine, economic disaster, the whole 9 yards.
So a pretty rough time to be growing up, even if you were part of the elite.
Oh, absolutely. And then in the aftermath, you have this brief period of liberalization. Intellectuals, artists, they had a bit more freedom to, express themselves.
But that didn't last long.
Nope. Mao cracked down pretty hard to reassert his authority. It's what we call the backlash.
Right. And Domenach really drives home how these events, even if the Princeling kids didn't fully grasp what was going on at the time, it really left its mark on them.
It's like a crash course in just how brutal politics can be, even when you're at the top.
Yeah.
And it's during this time that we see the tragic story of Liu Yunro unfold.
Yeah, right.
That's the one.
Yeah.
One of the top CCP leaders at the time. And his son, Liu Yunro, Domenach, describes him as this brilliant young man, but he was also, well, to just say he wasn't afraid to speak his mind. He even expressed admiration for some Western ideals, which back then, that was playing with fire.
Yeah, you couldn't just say that kind of stuff out loud, especially not during those times.
Exactly. And sadly, that independent thinking proved fatal for Liu Yunro. He disappeared during one of the political campaigns, most likely purged because of his views.
And a stark reminder of what was at stake, even for those within the inner circle.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to note the role of women in these families, it was changing during this period too. Domenach, he really highlights how the mothers of these princelings, they weren't just, standing on the sideline.
They were a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, absolutely. Managing the households, navigating the political minefield of their husbands' careers, and playing a huge role in their children's education. They were the backbone of these families, providing stability during a time of absolute chaos.
And then, just when you thought things couldn't get any more intense, the Cultural Revolution hits. Talk about a turning point.
No kidding. 1966 to 1971, those 5 years were pivotal, not just for the Princelings, but for all of China.
Here.
The Cultural Revolution was meant to purge capitalists and traditional elements from society, but it quickly spiraled into violence and utter chaos.
And the Princelings, even with their privileged status, they weren't immune.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Many CCP leaders and their families were targeted. We're talking public humiliation, imprisonment, even death. It was a complete upending of the established order.
Even Xi Jinping, China's current leader, he got caught up in it.
Right. He was just a teenager when he was sent to the countryside during the Cultural Revolution.
Imagine being ripped away from everything you know, sent to live in some remote village. That had to have a lasting impact.
Domenach talks about how she had to do hard labor out there. It was a formative experience, no doubt.
Yeah, talk about shaping your worldview.
Exactly. And as traumatic as the Cultural Revolution was for so many, it's fascinating to see how these princeling families, they showed incredible resilience.
They didn't just survive, they adapted.
They relied on each other, leaned on those deep family connections to navigate that dangerous landscape. And, Domenach, he points out something really interesting. The daughters, especially, they played a vital role in keeping those family connections alive.
They were the glue that held everything together.
Exactly. And, all that hardship, it created these bonds of loyalty and obligation that ran deep. And that's important because, as we'll see, those connections, they would prove to be incredibly valuable in the years to come.
It's hard to believe after everything they went through, but like you said, they came back strong.
Right. The Cultural Revolution ends. Mao Zedong dies in 76, and that's when you start to see the princelings making their move.
And those connections, those bonds they formed, that's what really gave them the edge.
Exactly. It's like all that hardship, it had actually brought them even closer together. But the political landscape was still, it was a minefield out there.
Oh, yeah. Navigating that system, it took some serious skill.
It did. And that's where someone like Wang Svin, he becomes such a key figure.
He was one of the old guards, wasn't he?
Right. A veteran CCP leader, someone who had Mao Zedong's ear, but he understood this new generation, the princelings. He saw their potential.
So he acted like a bridge between the two.
Exactly. Vouching for them, connecting them with opportunities. It was a brilliant strategy.
So it sounds like their comeback, it was a mix of timing, connections, and maybe a little bit of luck.
Oh, for sure. But it wasn't just handed to them. They used their education. A lot of them had gone to the best schools in China, even abroad, and they were able to get these important positions in the government, in business, even the military. They were everywhere.
It's like their childhoods, as tough as they were, they'd actually prepared them for this. They'd seen how the system worked from the inside.
It's true. And then you have Deng Xiaoping's reforms in the late 70s, early 80s, opening up the Chinese economy,
Right, a total game changer.
and who was in the perfect position to take advantage. The Princelings. They had the connections, they knew how to navigate the changing rules, and they were able to build those relationships with foreign investors.
It's like they were at the forefront of this whole economic boom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But of course, with that kind of power, that kind of influence, there's always another side to the story.
The dark side.
Domenach doesn't shy away from it. He talks about the accusations of corruption, about these guys getting ahead because of who their parents were, not because of their own merit.
Nepotism, right. It's that age-old question.
Exactly. And it's something that still follows them today, especially Xi Jinping. He's like the ultimate princeling success story, wouldn't you say?
The most powerful man in China. But like you said, his background, his family story, it's all there shaping his decisions.
And that's what makes Domenach's book so fascinating. He's not trying to give you all the answers. He's just laying out the facts, the complexities.
It's a deep dive, right? Making us ask those tough questions. So where does this leave us? What does it all mean for China, for the world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm.
I think the Princelings, they show us just how powerful family legacy those connections can be.
Even in a system that's supposed to be about, equality for all.
Exactly. Their story, it makes us think differently about power, about privilege, about how history gets written.
And it's a story that's still being written. Who knows what the next chapter holds? But one thing's for sure, it's a story we can't afford to ignore.
Well said.
This was a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.